Hi and welcome back. Thanks for joining me to the Playground Talks podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Efriat, and a certified parent coach, and I'm here to help you expand your parenting tools box so you can effectively tackle the day-to-day challenges with your kiddos, feel confident and joy in your parenting. This is actually the part B of the discussion I had with Dr. Bashah about how to prevent extremisms in childhood. Dr. Bashah is a licensed psychologist and she clinically specializes in mental illness, personal and collective trauma, addiction and grief. And she also an expert witness in criminal, immigration and civil courts, and she has worked on high-profile cases covering issues of domestic terrorism. In part A, if you didn't get the chance to listen, we discussed what is extremism and what does it mean to foster a sense of agency in your child so they can prevent falling into addictive ideologies. In this episode, we'll discuss how can you as a parent can implement the restorative justice versus the punitive justice approach. We also talked about whether we as an American citizen and children are immune to extremisms. And lastly, Dr. Bashah gave us some tips around how to navigate those horrific events happening in the world, how to explain those things to your children, because they might hear kiddos in school or other family members or whoever being around them talking about it. So let's dive in and hear what Dr. Bashah has to tell us. In your book, you have something that I really resonate with. You talk about restorative justice versus punitive justice in the context of countries. But I want to ask you, when it comes to sibling fight, how do you implement that idea to help parent be a better parent?
Yeah, this is a great topic. Yeah, I did a lot of research and work on this throughout my education, and it's really relevant even today with our global politics and what's happening in the Middle East. So retributive justice is the notion of revenge, equated to that. It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you more. So you learn from it and you learn your lesson. We really don't see that there's a lot of benefit long term because people aren't learning inherently what they did wrong, prevent being punished. And so it's not really developing their emotional intelligence or those pro-social norms that I was describing earlier. Restorative justice really versus retributive justice, you have to rise above the emotion. And so we will not find the ideal other than in our minds and in our thoughts. But really, we should search for the ideal. So Platonic idealism points out that the ideal that exists in our mind is more true than the shadows we see here on earth. So justice has many roles to play. And one of the roles, as I said, retributive, is that punishment to the individual as well as removing the threat from society. The other role could be more restorative in nature, which is to restore the dignity, the civility, the courage of a community or an individual, and to fulfill the promise each life has to another. And this should be especially considered as it relates to minors, where restoration could offer a means to shape, inform, teach, model, and correct the offensive behavior. So I have an example. I was recently approached by parents, and they have a child in school who was being bullied. It was a relational bully. It wasn't a physical bully, but it was very manipulative, emotional bullying. And this other minor was trying to really control and through threatening and scare tactics to get this other child to do everything that they're saying and they're wanting. So without disclosing too much information, I know that seems quite vague, but it's a form of relational bullying. So the parents came in very concerned. What should we do? We want to pull our child out of school and just move them to another school, remove the threat completely, and that way my child is safe. And that's what we want to do. And I said, well, I don't operate on that model. What are you teaching your child? You're teaching your child that you don't believe that they have the skills and the ability and the strength to really handle it on their own. And what we can do in terms of psychological intervention is really arm your child with the skills to set boundaries and limits and to really confront that other child head on. And they could still actually preserve a relationship through that, but they're also learning how to engage in that difficult conversation with their behaviors, with their words, with their actions, rather than being saved and rescued by parental figures. And it sends the message that the child is capable and that you trust them to be able to do that. And how powerful is that even for the other child, rather than just like being removed and then the conflict is like resolved. But what has that other child learned? That they can get away with it, really. I mean, where's the justice in this? And so, by arming the other child who's like essentially being bullied in the situation to be able to defend oneself and also shape and inform and educate the other child, because it's saying like, okay, you can't get away with this. I'm not going to let you. And here's why. And here are the consequences. But hey, I also care about you and I worry about you. And I don't like where you're going. And, we used to be friends. And now I'm seeing this turn and change in you. And I'm concerned about you. That there's this other, like the shared humanity that we were talking about earlier. And so what a powerful learning experience and opportunity for both the children involved to be transformed. And the beauty is it's an experiment. It's all experimental. We have no idea how this is going to go. We hope it goes well. But it might not. It could get worse before it gets better. And sometimes, in the state of world politics, that's what happens. So, what better stage than a playground to really learn these skills at, and, to also support our children. It was interesting over the weekend. My husband and I, we were having a conversation about power struggles with she's 2, but she's going to be turning 3. And so his approach was, well, I want to step in as the authority. I want her to respect me as the authority. I want her to know that my love is conditional. And I'm like, well, what are you teaching her that your love is conditional based on her following your orders and directions? What is that actually really teaching her? And you're also engaging in this power struggle with her. And because you're saying, I'm going to win, like it's going to be my way or no way. And if you want to fight me on it, I'll just prolong the suffering. What is she learning through that process? What are you teaching her? And so I had a similar situation later in the day where she was engaging in a power struggle with me. We were going to a friend's house to visit for a play date. And immediately when we got there, she started screaming and throwing a tantrum. I want to go home. No, no, no. And I was embarrassed. And my friend is there with the baby. Her baby starts crying because my daughter is screaming and throwing a tantrum. Like, okay. So, I said, well, let me just take a couple steps backward. Let me not engage in that power struggle with her. So I took her back to the car. I put her back in the car seat. I buckled her in. I started to give her some of her favorite things in the car and started to talk to her. I left the door open. So she started to calm down. She felt secure and safe in her car seat. And my friend ended up coming outside with her baby. So we had a little group meeting and play date outside. And, it took about maybe 20 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes. We were talking outside. My daughter starts calming down. Now she's kind of curious about the other baby. Now she's curious about the conversations and what's happening outside. Then she's getting hungry. So she starts asking for ice cream. So eventually she now wanted to go inside into the house. We stayed another 2 hours. We had a wonderful play date. She was playing with the dogs, playing catch with the ball, and she had so much fun. And at the end of the day, I taught her, you see, you were afraid and uncomfortable in the beginning, but, we just had to take our time and go back and feel comfortable. And then we were able to have a wonderful time. and see if you hadn't stayed, you would have missed all of that fun. And wasn't that so much fun with the dogs and the baby? And, so she's learning, but I think there's so many important lessons in there. Like, so much of the time we want to engage in these power struggles, and not just with our children, with other adults we're having conversations with that we ideologically disagree on. And we want to win the conversation because we want to show that we're in control. We want to feel we're in control, but it's a lose-lose situation. Sometimes we have to acquiesce. It doesn't necessarily mean surrendering, but I like to think of it as, I come around the other side and I'm approaching the problem with them rather than against them in a power struggle.
Yeah, it's trying to get to the truth together rather proving that I am the truth. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I know that. So it's different approach. And I also find it so much more effective when we kind of research together. And so we get to maybe some new conclusion, maybe not, which is also okay. But at least we have the option to have a real dialogue and not a monologue, like two people having just a monologue. So I totally get what you're saying. And I wanted to go back with the thing about sibling fights and parent actually embracing their restorative justice versus, punishing the child. So what I'm hearing you saying is rather than having the parent be the judge, quote unquote, he needs to more coach his children, kind of navigate the situation, understand what the other person or the other sibling really wanted and what led him to behave the way he did. And so they can be more, I like to call it effective in their communication because, with siblings, you'll have them forever. So you have a great interest to learn how to live with them. So that's what I was sensing when you talked about those two kind of justice. And I love the idea of it. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, coaching is a great way to preface it. Absolutely. Like, your role as a parent is not to go in and be the judge and the definitive authority and to punish, like, okay, you time out, you give this person that. It's like really equipping them with resolving the conflict together on their own and helping them see, okay, well, what are the consequences if we change places and I was them? How would I feel about the situation? So there's this appreciation of theory of mind and, what is a fair outcome? What does even fairness mean? How do you assess fairness? And sometimes you have to give something to win something. What does a win-win look like for both parties rather than a win-lose situation for either one? And helping them develop the skills to negotiate that together is very powerful. Very, very cool. Yeah, I commend you on doing that work. It can be exhausting. It takes so much pause and presence and patience.
As a parent coach, I'm familiar with the trauma triangle, and I love to use it just as an effective way to handle kiddos, let them to advocate for themselves, stand up for themselves. And actually, home is a lab. It's like they're experimenting all those kinds of scenarios in the house. So let them do that. And so they can learn those skills and can take it out of the house when they might be bullied outside. As you said, you are more powerful when you can advocate for yourself and solve the situation, which circle back to being an agency, right? Because when you choose, even if you had bad experiences, when you choose the good over the evil, then you have the power, like you get that you have the power to change whatever you want, to envision for yourself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. And in this way, you're raising leaders. You're raising children to be free thinkers, to have a moral compass, to equip them with ego strength, teaching them that they're not so fragile, that they're strong.
You believe in their capability to handle whatever coming in their way. I totally understand that. And I want to ask you something. We see extremism far away. It's in the Middle East. Do you think that the American citizen, specifically also children, are immune to extremism?
Yeah, I mean, youth and children are vulnerable and impressionable population just because of where they're at developmentally, and absolutely they are susceptible also to becoming extremist. And it's just as adults, when you have a simple solution or a simplified explanation for a complex problem, it becomes easier to wrap your head around it. And then the solution becomes oversimplified, like just blame them. This is the good guy, this is the bad guy, this is the enemy. And it's hard to really deconstruct that. And the tendency is it starts to reduce our fear. And because we want to experience a sense of control in a world that we feel is unpredictable, especially when we have, there is like this anticipatory anxiety. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Who's going to try to attack us again tomorrow? Who's attacking Western democracy tomorrow? What are we here for? Like, how long do we have to preserve this? Like, if we really allowed ourselves to be confronted with that dilemma and that cognitive dissonance I was talking about earlier, you have to do deeper work, and there's deeper questions that are there. And so I think it's fruitful to have those conversations with adolescents and that are age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, to help educate them and equip them with really understanding and doing that deeper level questioning and grappling with it.
So gravitating toward addictive ideologies comes more to the adolescent, not as early as the toddler, but there is work that we already mentioned that can be done to avoid our kiddos that might be trapped into those kind of extremism behaviors, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I think, there's the radicalization and extremism groups that, really prey upon the awkwardness and insecurities of adolescents. But, we saw these experiments with children where a teacher was trying to really understand and replicate what happened in Nazi Germany. And she separated her class between the blue eyes and the brown eyes. And she said, okay, if you have these colored eyes, you are better and smarter and more superior than the group with the other colored eyes. And you see, like, within a day, they were more aggressive to the other groups. They started to gravitate towards people with the same eye color as them. And this is just, an artificial experiment. You couldn't do that today, obviously. But this teacher, like, it was amazing. She documented it, she filmed it, and she was able to radicalize these children based on the color of their eyes. And so if you think about that, the inherent forms of separateness, that things that separate us into groups and things that we gravitate towards in a way that justifies and dehumanizes the other group, makes us hateful, makes us angry, makes us want to defend ourselves against these other outgroups. This is dangerous. And toddlers are just as susceptible to this. Again, it's a very simple, it's not complex. And I think we're all not immune to it. And it's all possible. There's so much propaganda and distorted content on social media. It's hard to know, like, what is trustworthy news, what is fake news. There's so many conspiracy theories that are out there, so it's a time of paranoia and distrust. And so I think, we also have to be careful as adults what we expose ourselves to, and looking at multiple media sources and searching for credible news and information that isn't so fact distorting or conspiracy driven. The other thing, I want to mention for kiddos, especially, and also for adults, that there's this amygdala hijack. What that means is that people who want to influence us, if they give us information that makes us feel terrorized or create an existential crisis, we stop using our frontal lobe, because now our limbic system is activated. It's a primitive part of our brain. We go into this fight, flight, freeze response system, and we can't necessarily think rationally about what's happening or think about consequences. And we act more impulsively because we don't have that behavioral disinhibition or ability to see rationally or logically or weigh scientific evidence. And so that is a tactic that media uses, that radicalizers use. So I think it's important just being aware of when that's employed, when we feel that way, that we should probably really step away, do some self-care activities, really ground and root ourselves, and come back and really think very critically about the issue rather than just responding out of habit or reactivity or impulsively, because that's when we're really giving up our power and control over the situation. So we can also teach our kiddos that adults have tantrums too. I've seen it. Politicians have temper tantrums. Adults have temper tantrums. Leaders have temper tantrums.
Oh, I liked what you said about the amygdala hijack, because it circled back again to being a parent and teach your child how to consume content. I also call it like the content diet. So I love how you said, you know what, when you see something and it kind of makes you really fear, and you can actually feel it in your brain when it activates you, and then your brain is just in a circle. I feel it like you have to run away. That's what when I see such things, I'm like, it's impossible. That's like the sign for me to say, no, that's not something that I want to engage anymore. I want to stop that. And then I need to take some time to regulate myself, maybe. And then I can continue and maybe research that topic and be more educated about it, but with a lot of conscious and awareness of how do I get the data, the facts, and asking question even before I'm Google searching. I'm asking myself, what are the things that I want to get the answer for? So I'm not going to be into this rabbit hole of people feeding me with stuff that they want to feed me with, the propaganda. So I like your note about be aware of the content, even as an adult, that you're consuming, and learn to control that for yourself, and also teach your child, coach your child to do the same. So thank you for this tip. It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
And speaking of social media, with everything that's going on with Hamas and Israel, there are many of horrible videos, horrible pictures, things that for adults it's so hard to process. I would love to hear your advice around how do you talk about the things with your children? Also, how early do you start talking about those things, and how do you present the topic at all?
Yeah. I was talking to my family in Israel and also my cousins, and it's challenging. I think children do pick up on what's happening, even if they don't understand it. They might overhear some conversations as parents are watching the news, maybe hearing the anger or the reactivity out of their parents and unsure what's happening. Like why is my mom crying? Why is my dad getting angrier? And he seems to be more irritable and temperamental these days. And they may not be able to draw the conclusions themselves. And so I think the biggest thing is protecting children, but you don't have to entirely shelter them. I think there's no right or wrong answer. And I just want to say, every child is different, and different ages of children vary developmentally. There's just so much variability that's out there. And so for parents, you really should trust your intuition on this one and not force anything onto your children, but really maybe create a space, a safe place for them to ask you questions about what's going on, and just say, there are some things going on in the world today. Is there anything that you've heard or maybe was mentioned at school, or maybe you heard, mommy and I talking about? What have you heard? Is there any concerns that you have? And so just asking them so that it's more like their own inquiry that is really leading the information. So you're not just giving them lots of information that they then can't process. The most important thing is that your children feel safe, that school is safe, home is safe, and really creating that sense of safety and security for them emotionally and physically, and knowing that their parents are going to be constant and they can rely on that constancy. from caregivers. It could be any of their caregivers. And so I think that reassurance is so important to keep them mentally and emotionally healthy. So some of my cousins who've, I've asked them about this approach, and because they're not so removed from the situation and we have family in Israel, so they may show certain things. Like one of my cousins decided she's going to show the Biden speech about Israel. So Biden, will mention words like war and identifying Hamas as a terrorist organization, that we will fight to protect Israel. We will defend Israel against their enemies. And so not condoning anything about these attacks with reference to attacks. So there's things that are in his speech, but it's also supportive. It's also comforting to hear like, okay, America is an ally to Israel. They're not going to allow them to be harmed. They're going to support them as an ally. And that will help to give them confidence and hope and optimism. And so, it might be something like that you watch with them and then be there to see their reaction, let them ask you questions, again, developmentally appropriate. My cousin decided to do this with her son who's 12 years old and has already, has understanding of things that are happening. So I think that's important. We certainly don't want to raise the children in an over-sheltered bubble so that they can learn from these experiences. But the most important that they feel safe, they know their family is safe.
Basically to say, you are safe, you're safe in school, although something is happening in the world, and not to bombard them with facts, only if they're asking. And last thing is to sum it up with some kind of an optimistic statement.
Yeah. I was seeking community for my own grief, and there were gatherings and candle lighting for Shabbat, and it was very powerful for me to feel that strength in community, but also be able to grieve collectively with community. And I think that's a wonderful place for children to attend and to participate in and be a part of. And I think, there's a Holocaust survivor who said, we will never show them defeat or fear, because we are not afraid. We are strong and we will always overcome. And it's just so powerful to hear survivors speak from that place of strength. And I think we must honor them. And there's a beautiful, powerful Jewish saying. I had the opportunity to hear many survivors speak over the weekend, people who were in Israel, who had witnessed the attacks, or had witnessed stories and came back and retold of the attacks from survivors' perspectives. And one common theme that really came out was there were so many heroes. And when they asked the heroes, like, how did you go into those pillaging fires and saving people and risking your life to go and save another? And they said, well, if not me, then who? And I think that's just such a powerful statement, and it's embedded in the identity of the Jewish people. Like, if I'm not going to save them, who's going to save me? If not me, then who's going to be there for us? And there is the sense of family and solidarity and unity and collectiveness, and that we come together despite, because of our collective trauma, but that we are united as a result of it and stronger as a result of it. And I think, even if you're not Jewish, learning from that, coming together rather than grieving alone, seeking and building and fostering a sense of identity and cohesion and community that helps you to be stronger in a pro-social way, that is so incredibly important.
It's again choosing the good and choosing to move on in a positive way, and not choosing to take that resentment or hateness into more violence. So I think that's what the real heroes are.
Yes.
Do you have anything else you would like to share with us, or tips you want to give the parents as they raise their children and cope with nowadays challenges with these horrific tragedies that's going on?
Yeah, I think, really maintaining the hope. And Tammy, just as you and I are doing in even our own grief and suffering, we're finding meaning in doing these podcasts. We're finding meaning in educating the public. We're finding meaning in being active, not passive. And I really encourage others to do the same and finding what resonates with them and what they feel is going to be meaningful and purposeful for them so that they don't feel so helpless. I think a common thing that I'm hearing across people is just not knowing what to do, feeling so helpless. And so I think going more into that active mobilizing role is going to help people process through their grief and grow stronger as a result of what has happened. I do want to say we do have a podcast. It's the Optimistic American. And if you go there, we do have a lot of different tips and strategies that we've pulled out of the book Addictive Ideologies and made separate podcasts on them. So there are a lot of tools that we like to equip people with using psychological principles. And there's worksheets that we created as well for parents raising children. If you know of somebody or loved one that's fallen trapped to these addictive ideologies, what you can do to help them. So there's a lot of things and resources there that we like to give away to benefit people's lives, and we're happy to help. So please reach out if there's anything further that we can do.
This is great, and I appreciate a lot the book that you wrote. It's so powerful and really gives, I think, its point that each person has the choice, and you help people make, let's say, the positive choices over their life. So thank you so much for taking the time being with me today, sharing your own family experiences and from your psychological background. And so I was really honored to have you with me, and thank you so much.
Oh, the pleasure and honor is all mine, Tammy. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Listening for our listeners, all the links to your podcast and website, it will be on the show notes. So go ahead and look into that.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, our book can be bought on Amazon. It's online. Paul and I also dictate it. And you'll also hear my mother's voice on there as well if you want to hear the audiobook.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that. I read the book. I didn't look for the audio. So I'm going to think if I want to rehear it now.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Amazing. We appreciate you and all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
So I hope you got some perspective about extremism. In the show note, you can find the links to the Optimistic podcast and to the book Dr. Bashah and her husband Paul wrote. I read the book and I highly recommend. It's really interesting, and it's including both the part where she talks about her family experiences, but also the 7 key components that you would want to implement so you and your kiddos are not going to fall into extremisms. So highly recommend to go ahead and read it. Next episode, we'll talk about how to foster positive learning environment and internal motivation for studying. So we will continue talking about internal motivation, which now when I'm thinking about it, it makes sense to foster your kiddos' sense of agency, to promote this internal motivation for them to choose the good over the evil. Thank you very much again for spending the time with us today. As usual, treat yourself and your kids with compassion and curiosity. Bye!